My grandmother forced me to confess imagined sins every full moon while my dad watched, then called me her little helper for making the younger kids cry on command. When I finally opened up about how it broke me, how I used to pinch my own little brother to spare him worse, she smiled and said, "You should be proud. You helped save their souls." I just stared at her. That was 6 years ago. Last night, she locked herself in the basement and cried so quietly I almost missed it. Every full moon, our entire extended family would gather for the cleansing. Children had to gather in my grandmother's basement and confess every thought, every doubt, every moment of happiness that wasn't centered on the family. Those who didn't cry enough were deemed resistant and faced corrections. I was 7 the first time I understood what corrections meant. My cousin Sarah, 2 years older than me, had smiled during math class because she solved a problem before anyone else. During that month's cleansing, when it was her turn in the circle, she confessed this moment of pride. But she didn't cry. Her voice stayed steady as she admitted to feeling smart, feeling special for those 30 seconds before remembering that individual achievement was selfishness. Grandma's face went cold. "No tears means no true repentance," she said. Sarah disappeared upstairs with 3 aunts. When she came back, her eyes were swollen shut and she couldn't sit properly for a week. After that, we all learned to cry on command. The rules were simple but impossible. Every joy, every laugh, every good feeling that happened outside family time was a betrayal. Got an A on a test? That was pride, putting school above blood. Made a friend? That was dividing your loyalty. Enjoyed a song on the radio? You were letting outsiders influence your spirit. But here's what made it truly sick. You also had to confess thoughts you didn't have yet, sins you might commit, doubts that could creep in. If your confession list was too short, that meant you were hiding something too long, and you were reveling in darkness. My little brother Marcus was 5 when he made his first real confession. He'd been happy at recess because he went down the slide fast. That was it. 5 years old and sobbing because sliding made him smile. But his tears weren't desperate enough, weren't sorry enough. Dad noticed. Dad always noticed when the crying didn't ring true. "He's fighting it," Dad told Grandma. "The resistance is strong in this one." I knew what that meant. We all knew. Marcus was going to face corrections unless his tears became more convincing in the next 30 seconds. I did something then that changed everything. I reached over and pinched Marcus hard on the soft skin under his arm, where bruises wouldn't show. He shrieked. Real pain, real tears. The adults nodded approvingly. "There it is," Grandma murmured, the spirit breaking through. After that night, I became the pincher. During every cleansing, the younger kids would sit near me, and when their tears weren't enough, I'd help. A twist of skin, a sharp fingernail, whatever it took to keep them from corrections. I collected their pain in small doses to save them from the larger horrors. By 13, I was an expert at the performance. I kept a mental list of fake sins to confess, spacing them out across months so they seemed natural. I practiced crying in the bathroom mirror, learning exactly how to make my voice crack, how to let snot run for authenticity. But the full moons came too fast. Every 28 days, another basement gathering, another circle of confession, another night of measuring tears like currency. The worst part was how they made us grateful. After each cleansing, we had to thank them. "Thank you for saving me from myself. Thank you for loving me enough to correct my path. Thank you for keeping our family pure." The words tasted like ash, but saying them wrong meant starting the whole process over. My cousin David once mumbled his gratitude. 4 hours later, when the second round of cleansing finally ended, his gratitude was crystal clear. Things escalated when my sister Emma turned 15. She was always the rebellious one, the one who asked why we couldn't just love God without the monthly interrogations. We all knew she was right. During one cleansing, she refused to confess anything, just sat there, silent, while the family waited. The basement got so quiet you could hear the water heater clicking. "I didn't have any impure thoughts," she said finally. "I only thought about family all month." It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. Grandma stood up slowly, and I knew Emma had crossed a line none of us had even approached before. They kept her upstairs for 3 hours. The rest of us sat in that basement, continuing our confessions while listening to the footsteps above, the muffled sounds, the sudden silences that were worse than screams. When they brought her back down, Emma was different. Not broken, exactly, but careful, measured. She confessed beautifully after that, tears streaming at exactly the right moments. But I saw her keeping count of something on her fingers when she thought no one was looking. Days, maybe, until she turned 18. The October before I turned 16, something went wrong with the basement lights during cleansing. In the darkness, waiting for someone to fix the fuse, I heard my youngest cousin whisper, "I hate this. I hate them." In the black, where no one could see who spoke, other voices joined. Me too. I thought I was the only one. How do we make it stop? Then the lights blazed back on, and we were all crying again, confessing again, playing our parts. But something had shifted in those dark moments. Were we all thinking the same thing? If we wanted to escape, we had to work together. The next morning, I found Emma in the garage, organizing old boxes with mechanical precision. She glanced at me, then at the door, then continued sorting. I picked up a box and started helping. Neither of us spoke about the darkness, about the whispers, about the shared hatred that had finally been voiced. Over the next week, I noticed things. Small things. David started sitting next to the younger kids during family dinners, casually blocking them from Grandma's direct line of sight when they forgot to pray before eating. Sarah began creating distractions during pre-cleansing gatherings, spilling drinks or asking elaborate questions about family history that bought others time to compose themselves. Even Marcus, only 8 now, had started warning cousins when adults were approaching. We were protecting each other without ever discussing it, but protection wasn't enough. We all knew that. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Emma had been assigned to help Grandma prepare the basement for the next cleansing. I watched her carry down folding chairs, each trip taking longer than necessary. When she finally emerged, she pulled me into the pantry. She pressed something into my hand, a key, the basement door key. I stared at it, understanding immediately. During cleansings, they locked us in. Fire hazard, sure, but family purity came first. Emma had somehow made a copy. That night, I showed David. He studied it like it might disappear, then handed it back. We both knew what this meant. An escape route, but also evidence. If they found it, the corrections would be be beyond anything we'd experienced. David started mapping the house during gatherings, memorizing which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, where adults congregated during different times. Sarah documented patterns in her school notebook, disguised as history homework. When adults checked rooms, who went where, how long corrections typically lasted, I became the coordinator. During family meals, I'd tap sequences on the table. 2 taps meant someone needed help with their performance at the next cleansing. 3 meant we needed to meet. 4 meant danger. Abort whatever you were doing. Our first real test came during November's cleansing. Cousin Rachel, just 6, couldn't cry. Her confession about laughing at a cartoon came out flat, emotionless. Grandma's eyes narrowed. I reached for my usual pinching position, but David was faster. He accidentally knocked over his water glass, sending it rolling toward Rachel. The crash made her jump, then genuinely tear up from surprise. It wasn't much, but it was enough to avoid immediate correction. After that, we developed a whole system. Spilled water for sudden scares. Pressure points on the hand that looked like comforting holds but actually caused sharp pain. Sarah perfected a way of stepping on toes that appeared completely accidental, but they were getting suspicious. Dad started watching me more closely, especially during my interactions with the younger kids. Aunt Martha began counting how many times water was spilled. Uncle James started checking our arms for marks. Cousin Peter, 11 and desperate to please, had been struggling with corrections for months. His confessions were never quite right, his tears never quite enough. During one particularly brutal session, where he'd been upstairs for 2 hours, we heard him sobbing out words that made my blood freeze. They help each other. They have signals. I've seen them. The basement went silent. Even the water heater seemed to stop clicking. Grandma's footsteps on the stairs were slow, deliberate. She surveyed us all, her face unreadable. Then she smiled. That was worse than anger. How beautiful, she said, that you've found ways to support each other's purification. Let's explore this together. They'd announced new procedures. Searches before entering the basement. No personal items allowed. And worst of all, corrections would now be immediate. No more upstairs trips. Everything would happen in front of everyone. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Emma's bed was empty, though her window remained closed. I found her in the garage again, but this time she wasn't organizing. She was deciding what to take. I helped her pack 2 changes of clothes, the money she'd saved from birthday cards, a picture of all us cousins from last summer, before Peter's betrayal, before the darkness confession, before everything went wrong. She hugged me at dawn, whispered bus numbers in my ear, made me promise to protect the others. Then she walked to school like any other day and never came home. Peter really just threw everyone under the bus like he was going for Employee of the Month at Betrayal Inc. Kid's 11 and already mastered the art of saving his own skin by selling out the cousin support group they'd built to survive Grandma's monthly basement cry fest. The family exploded. Police were called. Search parties organized. But Emma had been smart. She'd left a note claiming she'd met someone online, that she was in love, that she was safe but never coming back. Just rebellious enough to be believed. Just vague enough to prevent tracking. They made us all confess about Emma during the February cleansing. What we knew, when we knew it, why we didn't stop her. For once, I didn't have to perform. The tears were real. The guilt was real. The fear that we'd lost our strongest ally was real. But in the darkness of that confession, something else was real too. Emma had escaped. It was possible. The door she'd opened by leaving couldn't be closed. One by one, my cousins began to understand. David's eyes held new calculation. Sarah's notebook gained new pages. Even Marcus stopped crying at night, as if saving his tears for something more important. We'd lost our protector, our leader, our bravest voice. But Emma had left us something better than signals or systems or stolen keys. She'd left us proof that the basement doors weren't the only ones that could be unlocked. The full moons kept coming. The cleansings continued. The corrections grew harsher as the family tried to prevent another Emma. But in the darkness, when the lights went out, when the water heater clicked its rhythm, we no longer whispered our hatred. We whispered bus schedules. The March cleansing arrived with spring rain drumming against the basement windows. We filed down the stairs in single formation, a new rule implemented after Emma's escape. Dad counted heads at the door while Uncle James searched pockets. They found nothing because we'd learned to carry nothing. The circle formed differently now. Adults interspersed between children, breaking up our usual clusters. I ended up between Aunt Martha and a second cousin I barely knew, with Marcus 3 seats away looking pale and small. Grandma entered last, carrying a wooden box I'd never seen before. She placed it in the center of our circle with ceremonial care. The lid remained closed, but something about its presence made the air feel heavier. The confessions began with the youngest. 4-year-old Lily admitted to humming during nap time. Her tears came easily, the genuine fear of a child who didn't understand why humming was wrong. The adults nodded approval at her authentic distress. When Marcus's turn came, I couldn't reach him to help. He confessed to drawing pictures during free time at school, his voice wavering. His tears started strong but began to falter as he described the dinosaur he'd sketched. I watched Dad's jaw tighten. Sarah tried to create a distraction by shifting in her seat, but Aunt Martha's hand clamped down on her shoulder, a warning. We were all being watched too closely. Marcus's tears dried up completely. He sat there, mouth open, unable to summon more. The silence stretched until Grandma stood and walked to the wooden box. Inside were leather straps, old ones, worn smooth from use. She selected one and handed it to Dad. The correction happened right there in the circle. Marcus bit through his lip trying not to scream, and the sound of leather on skin echoed off the concrete walls. When it ended, he could barely whisper his gratitude through bloody teeth. After that cleansing, everything accelerated. David found me during a bathroom break at school and showed me new bruises. Not from corrections, but from his father's random checks for resistance signs. Sarah's notebook had been discovered and burned. She'd been locked in her room for 3 days with only water and bread. But we adapted. We always adapted. I started leaving notes in library books. Nothing traceable, just times and locations written on scraps of paper tucked between pages. David would find them during his study periods. Sarah created a new documentation system using her little sister's coloring books, hiding information in the crayon scribbles. The April cleansing introduced assigned seating. They'd mapped out where each child would sit based on their resistance levels. I was placed directly across from Grandma, in her line line of sight for the entire session. Marcus sat between Dad and Uncle James. David ended up near the door, but with Aunt Martha blocking any exit. That night, Cousin Rachel broke completely. Her confession about enjoying a butterfly in the garden turned into hysterical sobbing that wouldn't stop. Real breakdown, not performance. She clawed at her own arms, leaving bloody scratches, screaming about being dirty, being wrong, being poisoned by outside beauty. They carried her upstairs, still screaming. She didn't come back down. We learned later that Rachel had been sent to live with Great Aunt Ruth, who ran an even stricter household 2 states away, a place where cleansings happened weekly, and corrections were a daily occurrence. Rachel's parents called it an opportunity for intensive purification. We called it what it was: exile for those who broke wrong. The fear spread through our group like infection. If complete breakdown meant exile to somewhere worse, we had to maintain the perfect balance. Enough tears to avoid correction, not so many that we seemed unstable. I found David in the school parking lot, sitting in his older brother's car during lunch. His brother had graduated and escaped to college, never coming home even for holidays. David held a bus schedule in shaking hands. He showed me his plan. He'd saved enough for a ticket to where his brother lived. He could leave after school, be 3 states away before evening cleansing prep. His brother had agreed to hide him. I wanted to tell him to wait, to let us plan something together, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I noticed fresh burns on his wrists, cigarette-sized. His father's new method for ensuring wakefulness during morning prayers. He left that afternoon. His absence at dinner created chaos. His parents called police, but like Emma, David had left a note, this time about joining a traveling ministry, feeling called to spread the word. Just religious enough to be believable, just vague enough to prevent pursuit. 2 escapes made the adults paranoid. They instituted buddy systems where older cousins were responsible for younger ones. Any absence, any deviation, would result in both partners facing correction. They paired me with Peter. Peter, who'd betrayed our signal system. Peter, who watched me now with desperate eyes, knowing I hated him, knowing he needed me anyway. His corrections had left him walking with a permanent limp, and his confessions now came with a stutter that hadn't existed before. I could have made his life miserable. One wrong report about his behavior, one suggestion of resistance, and he'd face corrections that might send him to Great Aunt Ruth. But watching him flinch every time an adult passed, seeing him practice his tears in window reflections, I recognized the same fear that lived in all of us. During a family grocery trip, while adults debated bread choices, I taught Peter the pressure points. Quick lesson, wordless demonstration on his hand. His eyes widened with understanding, and something like gratitude. We weren't friends, we'd never be friends, but we were both trapped in the same basement, and that made us allies by necessity. May's cleansing brought new horrors. Grandma announced that confessions were no longer enough. What incredible strength Emma shows by making such a hard choice for her freedom. The way she planned everything so carefully, even leaving that note to protect her cousins, shows how much she truly cares about them despite having to leave. Now we would also confess for each other, report the sins we'd witnessed in our siblings, our cousins, our partners. The circle erupted in accusations. Old grudges surfaced as weapons. Cousin Michael reported seeing Sarah smile at a store clerk. Sarah retaliated by revealing that Michael had been hiding candy in his room. The younger kids, confused and frightened, made up sins they thought they'd seen, trying to please the adults. I reported that Peter had been exemplary in his devotion. No sins witnessed. He returned the favor, praising my constant vigilance against temptation. Grandma's eyes narrowed at our mutual protection, but she couldn't punish us for lacking accusations. Others weren't so lucky. The corrections lasted until dawn, and 2 more cousins were sent to Great Aunt Ruth. The basement felt emptier each month. Summer arrived with its own challenges. No school meant constant supervision. Family work projects kept us busy from sunrise to sunset, always under watchful eyes. The buddy system extended to sleeping arrangements. Peter and I shared a room, taking shifts staying awake to ensure neither of us tried to leave during the night. But Sarah found a way to communicate. During a family picnic, while adults supervised food preparation, she taught the younger kids a clapping game. Simple, innocent, just children playing. But the rhythm contained a message for those who knew to listen. Meeting tonight. Urgent. We gathered in the basement during the chaos of dinner cleanup. 7 of us remained from the original group, plus Peter and 2 younger cousins who'd aged into understanding. Sarah had discovered something in her mother's room. Train schedules. Multiple cities highlighted. Great Aunt Ruth was coming to visit. The implications hit us simultaneously. More oversight. Stricter rules. Possibly permanent reassignments for those deemed too resistant. We had weeks, maybe less, before our situation became inescapable. Marcus spoke first, his voice steady despite everything. He'd grown in the months since Emma left, found strength in surviving each cleansing. He proposed we use the upcoming July cleansing as cover. The adults would be focused on the ritual, guards down slightly. If we timed it right, we could use the basement key during the confession circle. But Peter shook his head, revealing what we'd suspected. They'd changed the locks after Emma's escape. How did Sarah figure out that clapping game code? The rhythm carrying secret messages while looking like innocent play is so clever. I wonder if she practiced different patterns until she found one that worked perfectly for hiding words inside the beats. The key was useless. Sarah had been expecting this. She pulled out her sister's coloring book, showing pages of scribbles that mapped maintenance schedules. The basement had a storm door exit, usually locked from outside. But during cleansings, with all adults inside, it remained accessible. We just had to reach it. The plan formed slowly. Create a disruption during confessions. Use the chaos to scatter. Those who made it to the storm door would run. Those who didn't would claim confusion, fear, trying to escape whatever had caused the disruption. We assigned roles based on position in the circle. I would initiate, being closest to Grandma, and most likely to create maximum chaos. Sarah would shepherd the younger kids. Marcus would block pursuit. Peter volunteered to stay behind, to be the one who raised the alarm, who tried to stop us. His betrayal would be believed because he'd done it before. It might earn him enough trust to avoid corrections, maybe even protect those who didn't make it out. I wanted to refuse his sacrifice, but the logic was sound. Someone had to stay, and Peter's history made him the perfect candidate. June passed in preparation. We We practiced during family activities, testing how fast we could move, how much noise we could make. Sarah refined the storm door plan, confirming it stayed unlocked during gatherings. Marcus built his strength, preparing for his blocking role. I taught Peter advanced crying techniques, ensuring his performance would be flawless. He learned quickly, understanding that his tears would need to sell not just sorrow, but shock, betrayal, failed attempts to stop us. The night before July's cleansing, none of us slept. We'd hidden supplies in various locations, money tucked in shoes, bus schedules memorized, meeting points established for those who made it out. Sarah had contact information for David's brother, who'd agreed to help any cousin who reached him. Morning came too soon. Breakfast tasted like sawdust, but we forced it down. Normal appearance, normal behavior, nothing to trigger suspicion. The full moon would rise that night, and with it, our last chance. During pre-cleansing preparations, I caught Grandma watching me. Something in her expression suggested she knew. Not the specifics, maybe, but the general shape of rebellion. Her smile held promises of corrections I didn't want to imagine. At July's cleansing, Grandma revealed photos of Emma, David, and Rachel, all caught at bus stations and returned to Great Aunt Ruth's compound. Our escape plans crumbled. She demanded confessions of our rebellion. But then the lights went out. Not like before, not a simple fuse. This was complete darkness, sudden and absolute. In the black, chaos erupted. Chairs scraped, bodies moved, adults shouted for stillness. A hand grabbed mine, small, familiar. Marcus. He pulled me not toward the storm door but the main stairs. Wrong direction, certain capture. But I followed because stopping meant losing him in the dark. We hit the stairs running. Behind us, flashlights began to pierce the darkness, but we were already climbing. The door at the top was locked, as expected, but Marcus didn't slow. He slammed into it with all his built-up strength. The lock held, but the frame didn't. Decades of settling had weakened the wood, and it splintered under impact. We tumbled through into the kitchen, Marcus bleeding from splinters but still moving. The house layout I'd memorized for years served us now. We ran through rooms, knowing exactly where furniture sat, which doors stuck, which windows opened easily. Behind us, adults emerged from the basement, their flashlights sweeping wildly. We reached the front door together, also locked, but with a simple deadbolt we could turn. Freedom lay inches away, but footsteps pounded closer. We'd never make it to the property line before being caught. Marcus looked at me. Decision made. He shoved me through the door and turned back, slamming it behind him. Through the wood, I heard him scream, not in fear but in fury, the sound of a child who'd held his rage too long, finally letting it explode. I ran, barefoot on gravel, nightgown catching on bushes. I ran. Behind me, the house erupted in shouting, but no one pursued. They had Marcus to deal with, and one escaped child was manageable. They knew where I'd go, which buses I'd take. They'd collect me like the others. But I didn't head for the bus station. Emma's plan had failed because it was too obvious. David's escape route led exactly where parents expected. Instead, I ran to the one place they'd never think to look. Mrs. Stills's house sat 3 streets over, home to my former piano teacher. I'd stopped lessons 2 years ago when Grandma declared outside instruction a corruption. But Mrs. Stills had slipped me a note during a chance encounter at the grocery store. If you ever need help, it had said. Anytime, day or night. I'd thought it was about music. Now, standing on her doorstep at midnight, bleeding from brambles and shaking with adrenaline, I hoped it was about more. She answered on the 3rd knock, took one look at me, and pulled me inside. No questions, no hesitation. She wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like lavender and tea, then made a phone call in rapid Mandarin. Within an hour, her living room filled with people. Former students, their parents, a network I'd never known existed. They'd watched our family for years, noticed the isolation, the fear, the children who disappeared. They'd been waiting for one of us to ask for help. Plans formed quickly. Not buses or obvious escapes, but a subtle extraction. I would stay with Mrs. Stills for 3 days, then move to another house, then another. A underground railroad of piano teachers and concerned neighbors, invisible to those who only saw threats in official systems. They had lawyers who knew about religious extremism, doctors who documented old injuries without asking questions. Mrs. Stills's secret piano teacher network turns out to be better planned than any spy movie. Who knew chopsticks practice was actually code for rescue kids from crazy families? Teachers who'd kept records of every troubling sign. A community that had been preparing to help if only we'd known to ask. But first, they said, we had to get the others out. The cleansing would be ending soon, corrections completed. The family would be on high alert, but also exhausted, vulnerable. If we moved fast, we might extract more cousins before morning. I thought of Marcus, who'd sacrificed himself for my escape. Sarah with her careful documentation. Peter, who'd chosen loyalty to children over approval from adults. Even the little ones who didn't fully understand but knew enough to be afraid. The piano teachers made more calls. Cars assembled quietly on nearby streets. Not a dramatic raid, but a careful operation. They knew which cousins went to which schools, had contact with sympathetic relatives who'd been excluded from the family for questioning the cleansings. As dawn approached, I learned that my escape had triggered something larger. Marcus's explosive rage had frightened the adults enough to pause corrections. Some cousins had been sent to their rooms instead of facing immediate punishment. Windows of opportunity, tiny but real. One by one, messages came in. Sarah extracted during a bathroom break. Her mother too focused on Marcus to notice. 2 younger cousins collected from their bedroom by an aunt who'd been banned years ago. Peter walking out the front door while adults argued about containment strategies. No one thinking to watch the most loyal child. Not everyone made it out. Some were too young, too watched, too deep in the house to reach. But 7 of us found freedom that night, scattered across safe houses, protected by a network we'd never imagined existed. The family searched, of course. Police were called with stories of kidnapping. Private investigators hired. But the piano teachers knew how to navigate systems. Legal guardianships transferred to excluded relatives. School registrations in different districts. Paper trails that led nowhere. I stayed with Mrs. Stills for 2 months while lawyers worked. She taught me piano again. Real lessons this time. Not the hymns Grandma had approved. Music became a language for processing years of controlled terror. Marcus joined me after 3 weeks. He'd been sent to Great Aunt Ruth's but escaped during transport. Gulfport, the drivers underestimating the fury of a child who'd finally tasted rebellion. The network collected him from a truck stop, following protocols they'd developed over years of watching our family's patterns. We learned that Emma and David were still trapped, but lawyers were working on their cases. Rachel too, though her breakdown complicated things. The legal system moved slowly, but it moved, and the piano teachers were patient. 6 months later, I sat in a real classroom for the first time in years. Not the family's controlled homeschool, but a public high school full of chaos and choices. The fluorescent lights reminded me of the basement, and I flinched at unexpected sounds. But I was learning to exist in spaces where crying wasn't currency, and joy didn't require confession. Sarah started documenting again, but differently now. She wrote stories about children who escaped, who found help, who built new lives. Her notebooks filled with hope instead of evidence. Peter struggled most. The guilt of his first betrayal ate at him, even though we'd all forgiven him long ago. He started therapy with someone who understood religious trauma, slowly unpacking years of being taught that love meant control. The full moon still affected us. We'd gather at Mrs. Stills's house, not for confession, but for connection. Sometimes we talked about the basement. Sometimes we just sat together, remembering that darkness could be safe when filled with chosen family. The piano teachers expanded their network. Mrs. Stills's secret piano teacher network turns out to be better planned than any spy movie. Who knew chopsticks practice was actually code for rescue kids from crazy families? Our escape had shown them what was possible, and they reached out to other communities, other families showing similar signs. They couldn't save everyone, but they could be ready when children found courage to run. A year passed, then 2. Some cousins reunited with excluded relatives who'd been waiting for chances to help. Others built new families from scratch. We kept in touch through careful channels, sharing victories and setbacks. I learned that Grandma still held monthly cleansings, but with fewer children each time. The older generation clung to their rituals, but cracks showed. Some adults questioned the empty chairs. Others noticed how many relatives had been excluded over the years. Uncle James left first among the adults, taking his family to another state. He sent a letter to Mrs. Stills months later, apologizing for his role, thanking her for saving his nephews and nieces. The network added him to their files, an adult who'd chosen differently. Eventually, the basement still haunted my dreams. Sometimes I woke believing I was late for cleansing, that my confession list was too short. But then I'd hear Mrs. Stills practicing piano downstairs. Remember that I lived somewhere else now. Somewhere tears were for genuine emotion, not performance. Marcus grew stronger in freedom. His rage transformed into determination to help others. He volunteered with youth groups, watching for signs we'd all learned to hide. His story became a bridge for other trapped children to cross. 3 years after our escape, Emma finally got out. Legal pressure and family fractures created an opening, and she walked away during a grocery trip. The network collected her within hours, reuniting us in Mrs. Stills's living room. She looked older, harder, but her eyes held the same rebellion that had started everything. We sat together that night, sharing stories of our scattered years. Emma told us about Great Aunt Ruth's compound, about cousins we'd never met trapped in even worse systems. The network took notes. Lawyers made plans. Our escape had been just the beginning. More families came forward. Parents who'd left but couldn't get their children out. Teenagers who'd aged out but worried about younger siblings. The piano teachers network grew into something larger, an underground railroad for religious trauma survivors. I started speaking at meetings, telling our story to rooms full of concerned teachers, social workers, neighbors who suspected but didn't know how to help. The basement became a teaching tool, showing how isolation and control could hide in plain sight. Some nights I still felt the phantom pain of pinching younger cousins, the guilt of causing small hurts to prevent larger ones. But therapy helped me understand that we'd all done what was necessary to survive. The real crime was a system that made children choose between types of pain. 4 years out, I got a call. Cousin Lily, the one who'd confessed to humming during nap time, had run away at age 8. A neighbor found her hiding in their garden shed, and she'd whispered Mrs. Stills's name. The network activated, and within hours, Lily was safe. She didn't remember me well, but she remembered the basement. Even at 8, she knew something was wrong with monthly confessions, with crying competitions, with corrections for normal childhood joy. Her escape proved that the cycle was breaking, that younger children were learning to run before the system fully trapped them. The family contracted further. Cleansings continued, but with mostly adults now, confessing to each other in emptying circles. Some left quietly, disappearing into excluded relatives' homes. Others stayed but stopped bringing their children, claiming distance or illness. Grandma aged poorly, her control system crumbling as children vanished and adults questioned. The wooden box gathered dust in a basement increasingly empty of voices to terrorize. The water heater still clicked, but fewer people heard its rhythm. I graduated high school with honors, something impossible under the family's education system. College applications asked about challenges overcome, and I wrote about basements and bus schedules, about piano teachers who saved lives with blankets and phone calls. Mrs. Stills cried when I got accepted to university. She'd taught dozens of children over the years, but we were different. We were the ones who'd needed more than music lessons, who'd required a complete reconstruction of what family meant. The network gave me a scholarship they'd created for survivors. Not charity, they insisted, but investment in someone who understood the signs, who could help build better systems. I studied social work with a focus on religious trauma, preparing to join the network officially. Marcus went into law, focusing on custody cases involving religious extremism. Sarah became a teacher, trained to spot the signs we'd all hidden. Peter studied psychology, working through his own healing while learning to help others. We scattered across professions but remained connected by basement memories and piano teacher protection. Our escapes had rippled outward, creating possibilities for cousins we'd never met, for families we'd never know. 5 years after that night of broken door frames and desperate running, I returned to the old neighborhood. Not to the family house, but to Mrs. Stills's. She still taught piano, still kept her door open for children who needed more than music. Her living room walls held photos now. Not of us specifically, that would be dangerous, but of piano recitals where certain children played with particular joy. Graduations where young adults wore expressions of hard-won freedom. Weddings where chosen families celebrated love without confession circles. We were hidden in plain sight, a constellation of escapes connected by an elderly piano teacher who'd known when to stop asking questions and start making phone calls. Our stories lived in sealed files and careful conversations, protecting those still trapped while building bridges for future runners. The full moon rose outside Mrs. Stills's window. Somewhere, a basement circle might be forming. Mrs. Stills keeping those photos on her wall shows such beautiful love, not direct pictures for safety, but she found a way to hold on to every child she helped save. That kind of careful, protective caring makes my heart so full. But somewhere else, a child was learning that piano teachers could mean safety, that neighbors watched with care, not judgment, that escape routes existed in unexpected places. Sarah published a teaching guide for educators to recognize signs of family abuse. Peter became a counselor, his story of double betrayal and redemption, helping others navigate impossible choices. The network grew beyond our family, beyond Mrs. Stills's living room. Chapters formed in other cities, other states. Not all cases ended with arrests and trials. Most were quieter. A child extracted here, a family relocated there, small freedoms building into larger liberties. 5 years became 10. The youngest cousins who'd escaped grew up free, some barely remembering the basements and circles. They went to regular schools, had normal friendships, chose their own beliefs. The cycle broken so thoroughly they couldn't imagine it had ever existed. I became a social worker as planned, but specialized in legal advocacy, the intersection of family law and religious freedom where our case had lived. Each case I worked reminded me that our escape had been both unique and terrifyingly common. Sometimes I drove past the old family house. New owners had renovated, painted it bright colors. Children played in the yard without fear. The basement windows were enlarged, letting in light. Just a house now, no longer a prison. The full moon still came monthly. Sometimes I noticed them, sometimes I didn't. When I did, I thought not of confessions, but of connections. The network of survivors, supporters, and advocates who'd turned our trauma into transformation. Mrs. Stills retired from piano teaching but kept her door open for consultations. Her walls filled with more photos. Weddings where love wasn't control. Graduations earned in freedom. Babies born into families that chose joy without confession. At her retirement party, hundreds came. Former students, rescued children now grown, network members, even some officials who'd worked our case. She sat at her piano one last time, playing not hymns but jazz, improvised, free, beautiful in its lack of rigid structure. The network hired professional staff, established protocols, secured funding. What had started as piano teachers making phone calls became an organization that testified before legislatures, trained social workers, published research on religious trauma. Our basement confessions became data that protected others. Not everyone's story ended happily. Some cousins struggled with addiction, mental health, the long shadow of systematic abuse. The network supported them too, understanding that freedom included the right to struggle, to heal slowly, to have setbacks without shame. But most found their ways. Careers, relationships, chosen families, real faith for those who wanted it, lives that would have been impossible under the old system. Each success a repudiation of everything the basements had represented. The last family gathering I attended was Lily's high school graduation. The little girl who'd been punished for humming stood as valedictorian, speaking about the power of education to transform lives. Her speech never mentioned our family directly, but survivors in the audience understood every word. Afterward, we gathered, not in a basement but in a park, not in a circle but in natural clusters, not for confession but for celebration. Marcus brought his partner. Sarah introduced her adopted daughter. Peter came with his sister, both working in helping professions now. Even some parents attended, those who'd left the system, apologized, done the work of understanding their complicity. The way Uncle James sent that letter to Mrs. Stills makes me wonder if he'd been wanting to leave for years but didn't know how until he saw the kids do it first. Did watching empty chairs at those cleansings finally break something inside him? Awkward conversations, tentative reconciliations, boundaries carefully maintained, but progress, slow and real. As the sun set, someone mentioned it was a full moon night. Once, that would have sent us into performed tears. Now, it was just an astronomical fact. We talked, laughed, shared food, made plans. Normal people doing normal things. Our freedom so complete it had become ordinary. That ordinariness was our greatest victory. Not the trials or settlements or dismantled systems, but this. Cousins chatting about movies, kids playing without fear, adults choosing their own beliefs. The spectacular replaced by the sustainable. I drove home alone, full moon bright overhead. My apartment waited. Chosen space, decorated how I wanted. Door that locked from inside. No basement, no circle, no wooden box. Just rooms where tears, when they came, were real. The cleansing had ended. We had won. Thanks for being here and letting me be part of this journey with you. Seriously, your strength and trust mean the world. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments. Alright, that's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking around while I dropped my little quips along the way. Always a blast sharing these with you. Like the video, it helps more than you think.